Absolutely. Whenever you see assassinations, or should I say deaths of famous African people, you have to look at the timing when it happens. And you also have to look at who benefits from the murder. When we look at Kobe Bryant, we see that there were two major business endeavors that he was embarking upon at the time of his death. One of those was the cancellation of his contract with Nike. Kobe was not going to renew his contract with Nike, and he was going to start his own player owned sneaker brand. And a few days after his death, he was actually scheduled to meet with his shoe designer to pick out the first edition of the new Kobe's under his own sneaker brand. Nike could not afford for that to happen. It would have cost them millions of dollars. And they just could not afford to have someone of Kobe Bryant's caliber not only leave Nike, but potentially bring with him all of the new talent in the NBA who had not yet been signed to a major sneaker deal. So that would have definitely made Nike very, very uncomfortable because he was not just doing it for him, he was doing it for the players, and they would have owned a larger percentage of the company than what many of them are currently receiving under their contracts with Nike, Adidas, Reebok, so forth and so on. So we know that Nike was not happy with Kobe Bryant deciding to part ways with their company. And then number two, Kobe was working on his own professional basketball association, which I believe was going to be headquartered in China. The NBA could not afford for that to happen because, once again, you're already looking at the loss of revenue. You're looking at potential new talent, Division One, Division Two, even high school talent leaving high school, leaving college, and going to the Kobe Bryant League instead of the NBA. And of course, the U.S. State Department would not have been thrilled to learn that Kobe was going to base his new professional basketball association in China, which happens to be America's political and economic rival in this 21st century Cold War. So for me, I have no doubt at all that it was the white power structure that killed Kobe Bryant, just like the white power structure killed Michael Jackson because he did not want to sell back to Sony his share of the Beatles catalog or his share of the Elvis catalog. Michael Jackson, for all intents and purposes, was a 50% owner of Sony by virtue of his control of the Beatles catalog. That's why Sony sabotaged Michael's last album, Invincible. They sabotaged it to put him in debt to force him to give up the Beatles catalog. This is a black man from Gary, Indiana, who owns the rights to the most successful and popular white music band, arguably of all time. And of course, Michael decided to accept a couple of concert tour dates to raise the raw cash he would need to pay off his debt to Sony so he could hold on to his Beatles catalog. And he made the fatal mistake of coming back to Los Angeles and practicing in the Staples Center. Of course, we know, I think the gentleman's name was Michael Conrad, who the white power structure paid to kill Michael Jackson. And he only spent about maybe 5 years in prison. That man is out living his best life, and for keeping his mouth shut, I'm sure that the music industry is taking care of him quite well. You see Whitney Houston, who they say drowned herself, is taking care of him quite well. You see Whitney Houston, who they say drowned herself in, I believe the water was either ice cold or scalding hot. I forget which one it was. But even the coroner said it was almost impossible for a human being to keep themselves submerged in water that was either that hot or that cold. Whitney Houston's family said when they viewed the body, she looked like she had been beaten. Her nails were broken. She had scratches all over her body. She may have had a busted lip. I think I had heard Whitney Houston fought for her life. Whitney Houston was murdered. And I think one of the reasons that Whitney Houston was murdered is because she was running low on cash. And I think she wanted to have a full audit on the money that she had made for Clive Davis and Company. And I think that had that audit went through, so many hundreds of millions of dollars that was misappropriated would have been forcibly returned to Whitney Houston, which would have prompted a lot of other prominent artists in the music industry to also order audits of the money that they had made for their record labels as well. I just don't think music could have afforded to let Whitney Houston have that audit on her earnings. And to see what portion of her royalties that she did not receive. We look at Prince. Prince was murdered because he didn't want to give his unpublished money to Warner Brothers. They manipulated him back to the negotiation table by telling him that they would give him his masters as long as he allowed them to remix his 25th or 30th anniversary of the Purple Rain album. And of course, Prince had always wanted to own his own masters. We know that. He once had the word slave tattooed on his face because of one of the sick and trifling exploitative contracts that he was in. So when they offered him his masters, Prince said to himself, probably, I finally get to own my own music. And that was only a setup for a setback. They got him back to the table. They remixed the Purple Rain album. And of course, he ends up dead. Okay, murdered, obviously, because they wanted the unpublished music. And we can go on and on with these types of cases. Jimi Hendrix was murdered by his own manager, who we found out later was an undercover agent for British MI6. And the reason Jimi Hendrix was murdered in the same fashion as Whitney Houston, mind you, but many years prior to her death, Jimi Hendrix was murdered because he wanted to finance the Black Panther Party in the Black liberation struggle. And of course, MI6 couldn't afford for him to do that because there was a branch of the Panthers in London and in several other European countries. There were organizations that were popping up, being influenced by the Black Panther Party. And the U.S. State Department also saw Jimi Hendrix as a threat for that very same reason. And that's why his death was ordered. You know, when you look at a lot of these hotel room deaths, we're seeing so many Black entertainers dying inside of the hotel room. These are orchestrated hits for a lot of reasons, whether it's to control the artist, whether it's to prevent them from going public with information that could be damaging to the executives of the country, whether it's to control the catalog. And of course, we all know that dead entertainers make more money than living ones.
Wow.
President Joe Biden tweeted out 1 year before his election on the campaign trail that the number one civil rights issue of this era was transgender equality, and not a single Black person said anything about it. Let me also say this on that topic. It's clear that there's a social agenda to destroy the Black family, because why would you need to teach prepubescent children about sex at all? Same sex or interracial sex. A 6-year-old is not interested in having sex at all. It's not even on their mind. A 7 or 8-year-old is not interested in sex. It's not even on their mind. But when you start to go through puberty, 11, 12, 13, when your body begins to prepare itself for you to impregnate a woman if you're a boy, or to become impregnated if you are a girl, that is the first time your hormones begin to fire off and you start, I don't want to say lusting, I don't want to say thirsting, but when you answer the call of nature and you now want to copulate with someone of the opposite gender, you don't get those feelings until you go through puberty. So if you don't get that call of nature to reproduce yourself, which is not so much about sex and lust and pleasure as it is about the maintenance and perpetuation of your species, that is organically engineered into us by Almighty God. But you don't get there until you're going through puberty. So, what is the purpose of teaching 5, 6, and 7 year olds about gay sex or straight sex? I don't want children learning about sex at all at 6, 7, or 8. But the reason they have to get to the children so early, the reason they have to get to the children so early is because we know that the most impressionable stage in a child's life for mental development and control is birth to age 5. That's the most sensitive period of all. And then 5 to 12 is the next sensitive period, and then 12 to 17. So the strategy here, and we know that there's psychologists who work for the FBI, there's psychologists who work for the CIA, there's psychologists who work for the government. Hundreds of them work for the government. So the psychologists educated the white power structure that if you want to make this a lifestyle, if you want to make this a permanent part of Black culture, you have to get to those children young so they don't think about anything else except being a transgender. And that's why we got what we got. I don't hate transgenders. I don't hate homosexuals, lesbians, bisexuals. I don't hate anybody. I love all Black people, but I reserve the right to disagree with any lifestyle that puts the survival of our people in jeopardy. And that is exactly what that lifestyle does.
Wow. Speaking on that, what are your thoughts on interracial dating? For those that don't know,